Okay, so relatively short presentation, 8 slides, but lots to talk about. And I want to talk, it says Unreal Engine World of Possibilities. And that was kind of my starting point, and I've gone a bit dark in some places, and I'll come back to that. But I want to talk a little bit about, your games development students, one form or another, what your expectations are, what your route through into industry is, how to fulfill your dreams rather than crush them. But in order to do so, we're going to have to crush them first, which is nice. So I don't know if any of you saw the piece on gamesindustry.biz. I think it was about a fortnight ago. And John Warners, who is himself an indie developer, was arguing that the kind of cult of independent development has reached ridiculous proportions where everyone can and wants to create an independent studio, create a game, win the world, sell millions of copies, retire to the Bahamas or similar. Because the reality is you can spend 3 years of very, very hard work, all your money, all your friends, and then sell 6 copies on Steam. So his argument was, is it ethically dubious to actually continue to sell this approach, continue to sell this dream that as an independent developer you can set yourself up and you can create this great thing and you can take over the world. And there's some truth in that. I don't believe he's exactly right. But what is kind of true about it is, and the Unreal Engine is a good example, is that it's never been easier for anybody to get their hands on professional level quality tools and create content. And it can be argued that we're sort of approaching a point now, very similar to the music industry, whereby everyone can create a game or music, and everyone can in fact put that out on a platform, distribution platform, and the expectation should no longer be that you're going to be able to create games in order to make a living, a career, money. Perhaps it's more about the art of creating games, and you might find an audience for it, and if you're really, really lucky, you might get that big hit. And so, are we at that watershed point where kind of mentally as a group of artists, we need to work out that, well, actually, this isn't a future career as much as it's a hobby or an expression of art. It's not entirely quite like that, though, so no, I'll continue on. So, presumably, you're all games development students, games design students, programmers, etc. Anyone who isn't involved in a games degree course of some description? Awesome. And I bet, well, let's do a show of hands. How many of you are really keen or sold on the idea of setting yourself up as a studio or an independent straight out of college? Not as many as I thought. So that's encouraging in some respects. But whether you're going into independent development yourselves, or whether you're planning on joining a studio or a publisher, increasingly games courses are prevalent throughout most of the major universities. So there's a lot of people going for a relatively small number of jobs. So what can you do to make sure you're the guy they're going to hire that goes beyond having your degree? Your degree is a good first start, but it's not the thing that's going to get you the job. So, hone your craft. Games development is a craft. It's a strange, whichever discipline you're in, it's still a strange combination of creative and technical. And so, the definition, it is a craft. And so, you've got to become a craftsman. You've got to become very, very good at it. The sort of perceived wisdom is 20 hours to get pretty good at something. So, yes, you could pick up the engine, dedicate yourself for its 20 hours and be pretty good at, being a tech artist or being a blueprint programmer, but pretty good isn't really good enough, ever. 10,000 hours to be an expert. Now, the reality is you haven't got 10,000 hours to spend at this point in time, but there's a point between 20 hours and 10,000 hours, where you become very good at your craft. And you should not also expect that when you leave university, you are an expert or good at your craft, because it will take you, your working life, 40 years, whatever, to become really, really good at your craft, to become that expert. I've been in the industry plus 25 years now. There are certain members of the audience who have also been in it a lot longer. And I don't think we can ever really say that we ever know everything, never fully expert. There's always stuff to learn and to absorb. And so to have a humble attitude to the work is, I think, quite important to, progressing with the industry, but also making sure that you're not disappointing yourself. Practical things you can do, network. Events like this are fantastic. Meetups, conferences, join online communities, talk about games, immerse yourself in games, live games. If you want to be a games developer, this is what it takes. It's not a cookie cutter career. And there's some other ways you can go. If you want to join the games industry, if you want to become an independent, then build your portfolio. Start small, build assets, sell assets, give assets away free. There's lots of ways to do that now through various marketplaces associated with the available engines. There are other engines available, but apart from UE4. Don't know why you'd use them, but that's your choice. But portfolio, your extracurricular activities, your building of a portfolio outside of the work you do at university is critical. Absolutely critical, because it again shows a dedication and an ability to work, and it shows that you are very serious about this as your craft. To potential employers, if you're going to become an independent straight out of university, you haven't got it to prove to anyone but yourself. Learn and use Unreal Engine. Duh, it's an Unreal Engine talk. But why learn Unreal Engine? So at this point in time, it's now, where are we? 6 years old, more or less. Very battle tested across AA, AAA, Indie AAA, pure indie, whatever distinction you want to call it. A couple of screenshots up there which I think kind of demonstrate it quite nicely. The one on the left, as you face it, is Planet Alpha from Adrian Lazar. Very, very small team from Sweden. Created an absolutely breathtakingly beautiful game. Hasn't sold brilliantly, unfortunately, and we'll come to some of the reasons for that in a minute. But that's the kind of level of work that's possible to create as an independent studio without constraints upon you and with time on your side. Hellblade, the one at the bottom, I think is probably the complete poster child for indie AAA or AA. Ninja Theory, established studio, but struggling in lots of ways to create content into the old publisher model. Small team, defined and built the game they wanted to build, but where the masterstroke for them was they started talking about the development of this game publicly from the word go, and so they built an extensive community that were basically pre-sold the game to this community by following every single level of the development, every single challenge, every single disappointment, the way they kind of took off-the-shelf technologies to build jury-rigged mocap studios. And so they created a compelling story around their game, which then translated eventually, into the sales and into a very successful title. They're also smart in the people they collaborated with. They collaborated with the Wellcome Trust, which brought in the psychology angle and the mental health angle. Again, very, very smart. But the thing that's important to know about Ninja is that they're all experienced games developers. They themselves have been doing it for 20 years. And so whilst they're indie, they're still very professional. And then MotoGP from Milestone. Again, a very professional studio, been in the business for a very long time, concentrates on vehicular games. Kinds of games that aren't too common on Unreal Engine, but MotoGP 18, I think, is an absolute return to form for motorcycle and particularly MotoGP franchise. So the breadth of the use of the engine within the games industry, it scales top to bottom. Good tool to use. But the other compelling reason to become skillful with the engine, and I think something that we need to talk about, is that there are now increasingly opportunities across industries, non-games industries, that are absolutely desperate for UE4 skills. Real-time technology has now become accepted within a whole range of industries for everything from prototyping, visually what cars may look like, or aeroplanes, etc., right through to kind of in-store marketing accessories for car configurators or kitchen configurators, whatever. And the big companies are doing this. So we've got BMW are using real-time technology for not only the design of their cars or the visualization of their cars internally, but also they're using VR to see how cockpit ergonomics work. And they all require knowledge of real-time engines, UE4 in particular. Architectural visualization, moving to real-time technology for architectural visualization has revolutionized that industry in lots and lots of ways, because of now client presentations are done in real time with the technology that allows light sources, wall textures, carpet textures, building textures, all of these things to be changed on the fly. And that's a level of expertise in the engine which is quite hard to master actually, but they're fundamentally affecting the way that buildings are being built and sold. Urban planning, likewise, we can now use real-time engines and sophisticated AI to visualize spaces and the way humans flow through those spaces. And then actually TV and movies. TV and movies is particularly interesting. The screenshot there is from a full-length feature that was built by a team in Pakistan, completely unbeknown to us until it was released. A fantastic children's movie. Not quite Pixar standard, but very, very close to it. But what we're seeing in TV and movies in particular, we've not only got the VFX areas, but there is increasingly content, CGI content being built real time. And that's flowing back into games because we're having studios that are building short movies or VR experiences in real time, in the engine, and then having built those assets and built those workflows, they're maximizing their revenue potential by then creating games around those IPs. And all of those industries are absolutely desperate for UE4 trained staff. They don't have them internally. And so there's employment to be had at these places, well, which might not meet with your expectations of joining the games industry at this point, but you spend a couple of years within one of these industries honing your skills, honing your portfolios, and that will put you in a very good place. Plus, no crunch in most of these places, probably better wages than the games industry, and in some cases, particularly with the automotive industries, quite unheard of anymore is you get subsidised cars. What's not to like? So, still want to go indie. Completely understand if you didn't want to go outside of the games industry or outside of creating games. You're all young people, you're all passionate people, you're doing games courses. Brilliant. So what have you got to think about? So, developing a cool game is just the start. It's not even the start. It's not good enough to create a cool game. The number of games I've seen over the last year, which have been created by good teams, really excellent games, that have just disappeared from sight. They've launched and they've sold next to nothing, maybe 6,000 copies. The number is almost immeasurable. And almost to a man, it's because they've concentrated on building the game and ignored the fact that they've then got to take this game to market. They've got to find an audience for it. They've got to deal with the discovery issues around Steam and other digital platforms. It isn't enough to be good at making games. You've got to be good at everything. So you've got to build a business plan. How are you going to fund it? Funding it from savings? Fine. Raising money? Kickstarter? These are all questions. Now, if you're going to be raising money or you're going to go Kickstarter, you've got to know a lot more about why people are going to give you money for your particular title. You're going to have to learn how to talk to people, particularly if you're raising money, talk to business people that actually have no significant knowledge of the industry or how you operate within it, and who are going to take a lot of persuading that their money is safe with you and will give them a return. Ultimately, Any investor is after a return. They're not after furthering your dreams particularly. Another point to highlight on is the way we license the engine, because there is a pitfall there if you're not careful. So there's Unreal Engine 4 is licensed in two ways. There's the free version. In terms of technology, all the versions are the same. But there's the free version, which you pick up, use for free, support is via Community, Answer Hub, etc. And you pay a 5% gross royalty once you start selling the product. What you have to recognize is what 5% gross really means. 5% gross is 5% of the sale price of that item. Now, a $10 game on Steam, 5%, relatively negligible amount of money. But if you create a great game and then you get picked up, you either self-publish or get picked up by a publisher, and you get into retail distribution of your title, which is $60-ish, maybe $49 or even $40, 5% gross of $40 or $60 is a lot of money. And depending on the deal you've cut with a publisher or a distributor, it may be more money than you're actually receiving per unit. So what you need to be aware of, and you can talk to us at Epic about it at any point, is that there is an alternative way of licensing. There's a custom license. And this allows royalties to be changed to a net royalty, basically. So it's based on revenue received by you, the licensee, after deductions to market. What you don't want to be is in a situation where you create a game on the gross model, it becomes successful, or somebody approaches you about a retail version, you're responsible for the license, they do the retail version, and you still have to pay the gross royalty. So if ever you get to the point in your careers where you've got a retail version of the game you've developed and you don't have a custom license, come talk to me very quickly, because otherwise you're going to get screwed. The alternative to that is making sure that the distributor takes the license on your behalf. Marketing plan. Have you budgeted for marketing? Time and time again, we see teams that have not budgeted for marketing. Generally, rule of thumb, for a smallish indie title up to $500,000 development budget, we would recommend at least 50% of that, so $250,000 should be spent on marketing. As we all know, discovery on Steam in particular is very, very difficult. Same with App Store, same with Google Marketplace. You have to learn how to differentiate or get your title recognized within the marketplace. And that ultimately takes skill, but it takes money as much as anything else. And it takes time. There's no point start marketing your product 2 weeks before you launch. You need to be thinking about it 8 months before you launch minimum. Or in the case of like Ninja Theory did, day one, start talking about it, get people interested, bring them in. Decide whether to self-publish or find a publisher. There still seems to be a kind of an attitude in the industry, and it permeates throughout, developer good, publisher bad. There's some reasons for that. There have been some pretty appalling things happen between publishers and developers, but by and large, most publishers act in a reasonably ethically way now. They have kind of been held to account by the fact that it's been possible to self-publish, and so they've had to improve their game. And it comes down to a decision for you, really, because if you're going to self-publish, you're responsible for everything to do with your game. That means things that are probably outside of your core strengths and abilities, and that means you're going to get pulled away from developing the game to concentrate on the distribution, the marketing, raising money, etc., etc. Now, there's a lot of very good kind of boutique publishers, for want of a better word, who are looking for great independent titles. They'll take the responsibility for marketing. They'll take the responsibility often for the license, and so leave you to concentrate on your core skills and the things you came into the industry to do, which is building the game. So don't discount the idea of going to a publisher. Of course, they'll take some revenue. They're bound, that's the deal. They publish your game, they spend some money, they'll take a cut of the revenue. But I think in most cases, with a publisher on board who believes in your product and is working with you, that cut of revenue that you lose from going with the publisher, you'll make up in terms of sales. So that was all a bit glum, for want of a better word, but real. So you still want to go in. It's not all doom and gloom, because it just takes passion, and it takes belief, and it takes skill. But if after everything I've told you, you're still thinking, yeah, this is what I want to do, then great. Because there's things that can be done to help mitigate all of this, and things that we can do at Epic to help mitigate all of this. Dev grants. We have a program of dev grants. I think it was 5 million we put aside originally, and every month we give out grants to developers who are doing cool stuff. There's no strings attached to that money. It's free money. The only string is you have to be using the engine. It's up to $50,000, and you can use it for whatever you want. So whether that goes into development, or keeping the lights on, or buying pot noodles, or into your marketing budget, it's money for you to do that with. It's a simple application process. It's on the UnrealEngine.com website. Generally, we require, there's a form you fill out, and it's good to have a prototype basically is required so that we can see something that's real. Of course, we get many, many, many applications to it, but then we also give out many, 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 many grants. And that could be a good starting point. Again, if you're looking to raise money, having already taken a 50K grant from us could maybe help bootstrap that raising of money for you. You've got a bit of seed money, it helps. Introductions to publishers, investors, and funding. One of the things we're always very happy to do, and we have programs that allow you to do that, is we will, if you like, act as a middleman briefly to make sure you can get introduced to publishers, investors, and funds, or all three. More importantly than that, we'll work with you as developers to make sure that your approach to those people is formatted in such a way as it makes sense to the people you're talking to. So we're talking about how, showing your business plan, showing your release plan, showing your platforms, showing your sales projections, and we'll work with you to actually, if you like, help educate as to how you make those projections and how you format to do this. And then we'll introduce you to, at the moment we've got about $500 million worth of relationships with funds across Europe. We think by middle of next year, end of next year, that should be about $1 billion worth of funding available to UE4 specific developers. And these people are looking for all sorts of projects. There's, the big funds like Mail.ru in Russia are largely looking for free-to-play games as a service titles. But then there's numerous smaller funds, up to the sort of $10 million mark that are looking for single-player titles. Engaging single-player titles that have a niche audience that can be marketed to directly. So really, whatever kind of game you're developing, and if you're looking for money, it's worth talking to us so that we can help introduce you to the right people. We give opportunities at trade shows and consumer shows to demo your titles. So we do this in a couple of ways. A good example is Rezzed at Tobacco Dock in London. We basically do a 2-for-1 deal there. So we buy a bunch of space at Rezzed. We sponsor the show organisers. They put a Unreal Engine pavilion aside, and for every demo pod you buy, we buy a demo pod for you. Demo pods there are, I think, about £1,000 a pod. We then invite press and also publishers, investors, in addition to the consumers, to come around and see the games. Great way to get not only exposure within the industry, but perhaps more importantly, exposure to consumers. Treat it almost like a kind of a public beta in some ways, because you'll get lots and lots of people playing and lots of people giving you advice or telling you what's wrong with your game. Very useful. We will always try and help market cool titles. If you think you've got something that sets your title apart from anybody else, or a cool bit of use of the technology, contact us. We'll blog about it. We'll stick it through our social media. We'll retweet. We'll post videos on YouTube. And we have about 800,000 active users on UnrealEngine.com forums and through our social media. I mean, obviously, we've also got 140 million users on Fortnite that hit our landing page. So there's exposure to an awful lot of people. If you want to talk to us, we'll help you use that exposure. And then on a purely practical level, we negotiated a whole bunch of preferential rates with all the boring stuff. So QA, localization. If you've got a free-to-play game or a microtransactions-driven game, we can introduce you to payment solution providers. Again, things which you don't really necessarily think about when you're beginning to develop your game because it's all exciting and you're being creative. But the reality is, if you can localize your game, you're maximizing the sales. If you can QA your game properly, again, you're going to get better reviews on the various sites. And if you can go with a preferential and preferred payment solution operative, then you're going to extend where and how people can buy your product. So, that was a lot of information, not all of it entirely pleasant, but questions, because there should be loads, or not. Or are you all stunned and now want to give up and go into something else?
Do you agree with the statement that indie games aren't indie anymore? The market's saturated and everyone's trying to be indie, so it's not indie anymore?
Yeah, I guess there's a kind of a semantic truth to that, isn't there? If everyone's indie, then indie isn't indie anymore. I mean, and you're right in a way, Epic's indie. We're not owned by anyone. You know, so when you've got Epic indie and then Two Man and a Dog indie, it makes no sense, does it? It's no longer a true definition. It's not even a definition of a style. But then, what do you replace it with? At least it has some, it brings with it some understanding of that kind of development, I suppose, and what that project might be. No one else? Oh, yep.
When submitting a game to like Epic, what kind of things would you be looking for? Rather than just being cool?
Well, actually, we're not looking for specific things. I mean, we're looking for good use of the engine, obviously, because then that helps us promote the engine itself. But in terms of content, genre, style of game, with the exception of illegal or hate-based, which has happened, yeah, it doesn't matter. You know, so we're not. There isn't a tick box that says, yeah, okay, this week we're looking for side scrollers. Not at all. It can be any genre. Anyone else? To the back.
Okay. This is really general, but I think that important. So we've got AAA titles, and we've got stuff like Hellblade. What would you say really is the definition of like AAA in the context of like Hellblade being sort of an indie, sort of pushed out as sort of an indie AAA type deal, and yet you've got AAA on the other side. What AAA even mean in that context?
I think it means production values. So they share very high production values. So where the difference between the two would be is Hellblade is a very defined product, 8-hour experience, kind of small, but beautifully formed, for want of a better word, and has, excuse me, and has those same production values you would then find in an Assassin's Creed or a God of War, etc.
How would you go about setting up a custom license that you're talking about?
Talk directly to me. So mike.gamble@epicgames.com. And yeah, we can discuss, what it means.
I'm not thinking about setting up one now.
Yeah, in future. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're...
One more.
Got one more.
I guess kind of similar, but when it comes to the grants, other than like working in the engine, what are you specifically looking for?
We're not specifically looking for anything, which makes it lovely and horrible because there's no way that you can second guess what we want to see.
Would you need to provide any design documentation?
No.
At all?
No, usually just video or and screenshots. I mean, and actually that's, do you mind, Dave, if I just...
Yeah.
One thing that's very important also to recognise with Epic, I guess, because we're two companies in a sense. We're Unreal Engine and obviously we're the games company, Fortnite. Elephant in the room there. Now, the way the licensing side, my part of the business works, we have not only a Chinese wall with our own games development side, so that there's a minimal risk of kind of cross-infection, for want of a better word, so you can feel comfortable talking about your games and know that we won't plagiarise it, as it were. But the other thing we won't do is we will never look at design docs or review design docs or give any feedback on design docs, because it's too much of a risk. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike. Right.